week's episode of The Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel McDermott. I know that because it says on the screen, otherwise I'd forget. I've had a cold for a week and my brain isn't working. Got a great guest this evening, Simon Blake, who we're going to introduce in a second. And he's going to sort of tell us about his life and his work, which are both very impressive, to be honest. Here comes the first sneeze of my cold. I'm holding it off. I'm going to be doing this all night, I'm afraid, folks. But just before that, to let you know, as usual, if you're listening to this on a Wednesday evening, it's the 18th of January at the moment, sort of around about 9 o'clock UK time, it's live. And therefore, love it if you joined in, drop us a message on one of the platforms for streaming on. I think at the moment we're on YouTube and we're on Facebook Live, although I did see us on LinkedIn as well. I don't know how that happened, but maybe it's just a video put up there later on, but who knows. And it'd be lovely to hear from you. You can drop us a message or drop me on WhatsApp, 07506 319 745. That's 07506 319 745. Oh, James has just told me we are live on LinkedIn. I don't know when that happened, but that's brilliant. So LinkedIn allowed us on eventually. It's only been a year of asking, but there you go. So it'd be lovely to hear you on WhatsApp at +44, obviously, if you're outside the UK or calling from a non-UK number, +44 7506 319 745. That's it. If you listen to this outside of sort of 9 p.m. on the 18th of January, it's a repeat, so don't call me. I'm not going to be happy if you do that. But if it's within 9 and 10 p.m., I'll be very happy to hear from you. That's me, done. Simon, hello, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, it's late for me being up at 9 o'clock at night, but apart from that, yeah, so feels like quite a treat.
Good. Are you usually tucked up in bed by 9? Is that what happens?
I start thinking about going to bed. So my brain starts closing down. And normally by the time the dog's been out and I actually get into bed, it's probably about 9:45. But yeah, I'm definitely not what you would call a late night owl.
You have so much work to do. I'm surprised you're managing to survive till this time of night. I'm very impressed that you've got any energy left at all. And we're going to get to hear about all your work, but you've been with your horse today as well. You had a animal day by the sounds of it. How were things with your horse?
Yeah, I have an animal day. I try to make every day an animal day, and certainly, well, every day is an animal day with the dog, but the horse, it's great. So I event and 10 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks even to the first event. So just getting back in the saddle after a couple of months sort of being very low key. First competition on Saturday, bit of dressage and show jumping to practice.
Right. And eventing is a race with...
Yeah, cross country, show jumping and dressage. Either do it over 1 day, 2 days is sort of sometimes or 3 days. And it's slightly different depending on how you do it. So yeah, cross-country show jumping.
Of the horse world.
Exactly.
Things. So good for you. That's very impressive. How long have you been doing that for?
I've ridden it always. Well, the first time I got on a horse was when I was about 5, and then I grew up in Cornwall, and so there was a man called Mr. Smead who let me have one of his ponies on. Yeah, as my own in return for helping with the other horses and helping with his wife, so who needed caring. So I used to sit and talk to her while he'd be doing various things, and then sometimes I'd go off and do some stuff on the farm and got a little pony.
In a Tolkien novel with me, did you live in a sort of underground, hollowed out house by any chance?
We didn't. We lived in a bungalow, but there were fields behind.
Great stuff. Where did you grow up, by the way, just out of interest?
North Cornwall. So the town was called Camelford, but so just sort of 3 or 4 miles away from Tintagel, which people are much more familiar with, King Arthur's land.
Yes.
So yeah, lovely, really nice place to grow up. They didn't have buses then. There are buses now, so it's all.
You had a horse, didn't you? So you didn't need a bus. You just clip-clopped around, sort of.
Yeah. Exactly.
Quite idyllic. Was it just you, or did you have siblings as well?
I have an older brother who is 4 years older than me. Sadly, he died a few years ago. But when we were growing up, we had plenty of time to spar with one another, and I was always the sort of annoying one. When I was 11, he was 15. When he was 18, I was 14. So I'd always be there going, me, what about me? We learned to love and hate each other at the same time, I think.
You learned to tolerate bruises, I imagine.
the whole shed load of bruises. Yeah.
Sure, I'm quite sure there were quite a few. Me and my brother were stuntmen. We decided we were stuntmen, which invariably meant we ended up in hospital a lot. I don't know how my mum survived the two of us, to be honest. She sort of like, she eventually died, but it wasn't because we terrified her. It was just something else got her. But I'm surprised she survived us too, to be honest.
My mum was a jeweller, so talking of stuntmen, and we used to go around to the agricultural shows selling jewellery, and we saw Evel Knievel at Peterborough Showground.
Get out of here, you didn't. That's a genuine claim to fame. I'm really impressed. I'm going to be asking for your autograph after that.
I've got his somewhere.
Have you? I had Evel Knievel, the stunt bike, you know. There was a toy you could buy called the Evel Knievel stunt bike, which would jump up ramps and spin and land. And so
it was red and blue, wasn't it?
Yes, it was my favourite toy of all time, and that was it. So, oh God.
I put it on my Christmas list every year for many years, along with Mr. Frosty. I never got it.
You had a very neglectful childhood as well as it was being idyllic.
No plastic in our house.
I know a few good therapists who can help you over that trauma, don't you? We'll sort you out after the show, okay? And so you had this, sounds like a very lovely childhood in a hobbit cottage, riding horses and getting beaten up by your brother. So that you couldn't want for more than that, really, could you, to be honest?
Summarizes it very well.
And how did you make that leap to then working with, because you then moved on to, I guess you were successful at school, you got through school, you went to university, that sort of route? Yeah.
I did. I wasn't brilliantly successful at school. I didn't get any A's or A stars in my I was one of the first years to do GCSEs. I was just in that bit. I got five B's, a few C's, and a D at GCSE, and then but I wasn't that interested at school, and our school wasn't that interested in people who weren't interested, which is fair enough, I guess. And then went to sixth form to do sixth form college actually to do my A levels, and then went to Cardiff University.
And what did you?
But I guess the key. Sorry.
What did you study at Cardiff?
Psychology. I was supposed to be an educational psychologist by now, but I fell in love and sort of chased somebody around a bit and came back and forgot to apply and got interested in sex education job. And just, been on a lovely adventure since then and just never quite got around to it almost 30 years on.
Yeah, so that nicely gets us to the first piece of work that you did, which was working in sex education with young men, was it?
Right, that's right. I think just to make the link to your point before, my education bit. So in Camelford, there was a special unit attached to our primary school for children with Down syndrome. And Action for Children or NCH Action for Children at the time used to run a play scheme during the summer, and I volunteered to work on a play scheme and also the Riding for the Disabled Association. And so that was really how I knew to apply for a job to a charity. And so I worked at Cardiff AIDS Helpline as a gay men's outreach worker. So when we were still, people still dying from AIDS-related illness rather than living with HIV primarily, and then got the job with the Family Planning Association doing sex education for young men in the South Wales valleys, which was really, amazing experience, and taught me a huge amount actually about what it means to have a gendered perspective on growing up, and to become aware of gendered perspective and what it means in a positive way, what it means in terms of challenging stereotypes of what it means to be a real man, as it was in a real woman, what those expectations were. So just talking to, I guess I was only 22, 23 at the time, and felt like I was at least 3 generations away from young people working who in reality were probably only 6 or 7 years younger than me, but just sitting and having those conversations, truly fascinating.
Yeah. What were you sort of most surprised with, do you think?
I guess, what was I most surprised with? I think the desire to talk. There's this constant perception that that boys don't want to talk about things, but you obviously have to fight. We bully them up and rough them up to not talk, to not feel, to not want to do things, and then find that actually then they get blamed for some of the behaviours that they learn from people around them, but actually finding ways to have good quality conversations, to talk about what it means to be a boy, where you get your support and help from, what it means to ask for help, what it means to be emotional in relationships, or to understand your emotions. We're all emotional, but to understand them and be emotionally intelligent. So it was quite something. It was a real privilege as a first job, certainly, rather as any job, but it definitely as a first job, it set the bar high.
I think it's interesting because I'm a bit older than you, and certainly a lot older than those kids. But one of the things that surprises me, and James, as you heard, my technician who's hiding in the background, always takes a mick out of the fact that I'm sort of over the hill, almost dead in his eyes, really, and surprised that I'm still going. Every week he's like, "Oh, you're still alive, good Lord," because he's only 12 or something. I don't know, sort of. But we were having a chat just before about some of those issues around gender and gender identity, and what I find fascinating at the moment is when I talk to young people, they are so much more clued up on these issues than I ever was at that age. It's phenomenal. I mean, I'm absolutely blown away by them, I have to say.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were getting a similar experience. I mean, it sounds like a bit you were, like, because there is a stereotype of boys and men don't want to talk. I think it's full of shit, that stereotype. It's never been my experience. It's never held out true in my experience. I think there are contexts in which men and boys don't want to talk because they clearly get the signal. You're not going to be taken seriously. We're not going to listen to you. It's not important. And they pick up on that and they shut up and go away. And fair enough.
Yeah.
But actually, my experience is men and boys will talk forever if you in a facilitating environment. But it sounds like the young men you were working with were surprising you with their sort of openness and their intelligence. And
I don't know. I mean, so this was what 1996 now. So it wasn't. I guess it was so far away from my own experience, right. That at that time it definitely was a really a brilliant surprise. I had nothing to base really, I guess, this on, and I'd worked in America when I was a student on a summer camp for 3 years, and so had learned a bit about connecting and building relationships with young people and understanding young people. I think the bit which perhaps I was more repressed about really was around talking about sexuality, talking about emotions, talking about what it felt to be like to be a man, or to be growing up as a young man, about expectations. I don't think that had ever been part of my experience. I just and so I think it was that widening of experience that was happening. So it was as much about a learning experience for me as it was for them, which of course is how every good
ideal relationship that
should
right.
be.
You want it to be like that. You want to be humble enough to learn from the people that you're supposed to be educating. And so, it sounds like it was an ideal match and that you sort of really enjoyed it. And I guess all those projects were sparked by the sort of HIV stuff, and particularly trying to outreach to men and young boys around that, because at that point HIV was being labelled in a specific way, and men were more at risk. It was deemed.
The sex education project I was running was actually funded from teenage pregnancy monies. So it was prior to the teenage pregnancy strategy in England being done, but Merthyr Tydfil had one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancy in Europe. And of course, Wales got quite a lot of money from the EU at that time in the Valley. So I can't remember whether it was European money or whether it was health promotion money, but it was very much, I'd worked at Cardiff AIDS Helpline, which was obviously from HIV money, and that was at the time national ring fence money, but this was teenage pregnancy money. So it was across the piece, really.
Okay, great. It sounds very exciting and much needed work. One hopes it's still going on. So
there's definitely some of it going on. I mean, we had an amazing, so I worked in sexual health then really until 2015 in various ways, shapes and guises. And part of that was the teenage pregnancy strategy in England, which there were similar strategies in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, and indeed in Jersey, and chlamydia screening programme, and then all of the work that was done around personal social health education, of which there became much more understanding about actually what's in this for boys and young men. If we're only talking about the biology of contraception and reproduction, isn't good enough for young women and girls, but it's certainly not going to engage boys and young men. So there is still lots more work that needs to be done, but there is sex and relationships education is probably still patchy. It's probably still too biological, probably still starts a bit too late. But I hope that we've moved on a bit in the last 30 years.
I would hope so, but I also think that there's still a lot of anxiety that many parents feel. I mean, I know a lot of parents are really grateful that schools have taken on and they can avoid it and swerve it. But there is a sense in which, and I don't know if you feel this as well, but there's a sense in which these issues are being turned into political footballs more than they used to be. There was a sense for a while, I think, that we were happy to let professionals deliver strategies that had been agreed, that were rational strategies to try and meet, if you like, health and public health targets and psychological health targets. But now they're being slightly hijacked by these sort of political debates, almost moral and ethical debates about should conversations be happening. I don't know if you've been experiencing that or feel that that's correct or not.
I mean, certainly now some issues. I mean, it's a nonsense, isn't it? How some of the issues become these political footballs, and certainly, what we've seen around Gender Recognition Act in Scotland and various others, around those sorts of things. But actually, sex education was always politicised. Family and youth concern. When I was working in sex education all the time, we'd write books about things that had been said, and it was politicized in a different sort of way. I think the bit which we underestimate is how much noise we now hear when things are being politicized. It used to be that there'd be a letter in the Times. Yes. It's now that you might get 5,000 tweets on something. So I think if you are engaged with and thinking about something, then you can really see it. It's very close to your face now and feel it because of Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. You've got all sorts of ways that people have got, which is great in some ways because it means that you can get social movements and you get connection and you get people providing peer support. On the other hand, it means that things lose nuance. It becomes very black and white.
Are you allowed to have a personal position around these whole issues about gender recognition, or is that can you not step into? Because I know you run an organisation. I don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position, so you can just say I don't want to talk about it.
I'm very happy to talk about it. I used to be vice chair of Stonewall, and we're absolutely supportive of the gender self-ID. There is absolutely nothing in any country that already has this, of which there are numerous, and states that prove or demonstrate that it creates the risk which people are saying the things which people are talking about are covered under the Equalities Act rather than under self-ID. And yeah, that I think the bit which we have to acknowledge is that there is a very real fear about violence towards women. The bit which is conflated is the sense of trans women and the idea that they pose a threat to cisgendered women as opposed to cis men providing that threat. And the thing which we have to do is find a way to have conversations, because the majority of people support gender self-ID, support the rights, dignity of trans people, trans men and women. Just absolute solidarity with trans and non-binary people politicized on a day-by-day basis.
I'm with you. I mean, as a psychologist, I'm fed up of, I was saying to James before the show, I'm fed up of having to treat suicidal children because society won't accept them, and it's just intolerable. Yeah. And if you ask me to make a choice between a child that's being suicidal and hurting somebody's feelings, well, you can fuck off. There's no choice. It's that simple for me. In terms of I think it's really interesting because I spent many years working in the domestic abuse field and violence, male violence towards women field, and I think there are triggering subjects around it, which are deliberately triggered or maybe just triggered. I don't know. Maybe people are just triggered about it, but people seem to forget that most of this violence is by somebody you know.
Yeah.
It happens in your intimate relationships mostly. It's not from strangers, and certainly not from strangers sharing a toilet with you who may have transitioned from male to female. I mean, that's absolutely, it's never happened ever.
Yeah.
And the idea that a predatory offender would go through gender transition to be able to predate is bonkers.
I mean, I think the key bit in all of this, of course, is that the net effect is it hurts everybody, because
I think that's right.
That it creates difficulty and challenge for trans people. It also for women who are perceived to be too butch. It creates all sorts of worry and concern. And of course, the bit about this is that it wasn't that long ago that gay men like me were also being people were afraid of us in toilets, and of lesbians in toilets, and so this sort of moral panic is a real issue. But of course, the other bit that we just then it isn't about one or the other. It is about everybody being safe. That rights is not pie. That everybody has the right to be safe. Everybody has the right to dignity. Everybody has the right to be who they are and to live authentically without fear. That's the bottom line for me.
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember, because that was when I was an undergraduate, which was back in the days when dinosaurs were still walking the earth. And I am an old pterodactyl. I was just a little baby pterodactyl then. But I was in a show at uni, which was about these issues. So it's strange because it was a play about a very famous French hermaphrodite who ended up being hermaphrodite. Used to be a term for used for intersex people. It's not new, intersex, different genders. It's not new. If you go to traditional cultures, they always had 4 or 5 gender identities that you could choose from, mix and match. It's only us neo-Christian weirdos that have these binary things. I don't know why we need this binary. There's nothing in nature that is binary. Yeah. That's a fact. Nature is based upon diversity. That's how health is expressed through diversity. It's bonkers to think of it any other way.
I'm just going to say now, it's twice now you said it's bonkers, and working mental health, and it's wild. It may be absolutely bizarre, whatever it is, it's not bonkers. It's not
I definitely need to be told off my sloppy language. Thank you for that. I'm probably going to be sloppy though, so you'll have plenty of opportunities.
I've said it now. So yeah, take that as the one.
Please feel free. I thoroughly deserve it for my lack of correctness in my language. So, but it is a strange thing to think that people could argue that binary is healthy when nothing in nature is binary, and it's diversity and difference, and it's built in genetically for us to be different and diverse.
100%, and I think the bit which, having worked at the National Children's Bureau for a long time and really focusing on trying to create safe environments for children to grow up in. Obviously there are adults who are being hurt by all of this, but in amongst all of this moral panic, we've got another generation of children and young people who, as you said, in the worst of circumstances, may be suicidal, but also coming up with the scars and the damage that is being done, and that's unforgivable. I'm fed up with listening to this nonsense. We have to be child-centric about this and think about these children, and we have to be focused on our most vulnerable always. To be a humane, decent society is a society that thinks about its most vulnerable first. That's it. Yeah. Anything else is unconscionable. It's just wrong. There's no debate about it. So. Interesting segue. Let's come back to your story. Thank you for sort of sharing your views. I mean, it's really important, I think, that that people are given platforms in which to say what we are saying, because there's so much of these culture wars stuff that's going on, and very powerful platforms are given to people who have very negative views and ill-informed views, and anti-human views, to be honest. And of course, remember, all of this is the idea even of a culture war is a construct in order to get us talking about things. Nothing to see here. Let's talk about that. But that takes us into a whole different realm of conversation. So
we will maybe touch upon. But so you work with these young guys in Wales and then in England. Then you're moving on to, I think you moved on to Brooke at some point, Brooke Advisory.
But before that, I ran the Sex Education Forum. The Sex Education Forum was based at the National Children's Bureau. Set up in 1989 when there was another moral panic, this time about sex education and in the context of HIV, under Conservative government, there was new sex education guidance published, which was about teaching people about HIV and about safer sex protecting. So there's a whole range, the papers that were just going wild. And in amongst that, Anne Wayman, who was working at the National Children's Bureau, time went on to run Family Planning Association, brought together a group of people from churches, Brooke, Terence Higgins Trust and others to try to build consensus about sex education. And that the forum still exists now. It's an independent charity now, but continuing to build consensus. So I had absolute joy of that. And within that, we had new guidance, a new curriculum. The age of consent was equalised. Section 28 was repealed. Teenage pregnancy strategy was published. Sexual health and HIV strategy was published. Quality Protects, which is for children in care. There was a really exciting sort of focus if you think about vulnerable children. The Social Exclusion Unit was set up in 1998. So I had that, and then I worked at the National Children's Bureau, did a whole raft of things, sort of drug education, sex education, play, children with HIV, childhood bereavement, volatile substance abuse. So a whole range of things. We sort of had at the National Children's Bureau, we had the things that every child needs in one department, and we had then the things that some children need in another. And I was in the department was really about trying to ensure everybody got the health and well-being support, personal social health education that they needed, whether they're in criminal justice system, health settings, youth settings, schools, etc. and then I went on to Brooke,
Okay.
a young people's sexual health charity, 16 years or so ago now, I guess 2006.
And you sort of transformed Brooke, didn't you? Because it went from being like separate organisations. Didn't you campaign for it to be recognised by the Care Quality Commission?
Yeah, so we were yes. So yes to both of those things. So first, the Care Quality Commission. There are a range of voluntary sector health providers who wanted to be regulated, because one of the things which anybody who works in the voluntary community sector and engages with statutory services will know is that you're often not taken as seriously because you're voluntary sector, which means you're charity, which means that you're not qualified nurses and all those things, which of course is nonsense. Yeah, that if you run clinical services, you have people with the same qualifications. So that regulation was a really important part of that. But Brooke had been set up as independent charities when it was set up from the 60s onwards, because there were so many challenges to its existence, because of course it was challenging the status quo, set up by Helen Brooke to provide contraception to unmarried women before the NHS did.
That's right.
And so if there was a legal challenge, then they were protected. They were protected organisations. But of course,
segue off a little bit, because I think before Brooke, and I think it is quite important, because I did a lot of work way back in the sort of closure programs around some of the learning disability hospitals and moving people into their own homes. And some people, we were moving in these communities which were identified as their community. Of course, they never born people, they weren't born there, were born on the hospital and grew up in the hospital, but that was their community. And there was quite a significant number of older female patients, I would say 5 in the cohort I was with, who didn't have a learning disability, but were women who'd had children outside of marriage, had been institutionalised, been put in prison because they couldn't be found guilty of anything, but they were put in a learning disability hospital. And I saw with my own eyes one of those situations where I pretended to be asleep in a session once. I don't know if I told you this story. I was telling somebody about it the other week. But I knew this myth about these women who didn't have learning disabilities, who pretended to have learning disabilities because they'd lived in the hospital grounds for so long. And I pretended to be asleep in a session. And it happened. One of the women came out of character, and she started organising the patients, and she didn't have a learning disability at all, but she learned to fit in over the years. And that's what used to happen before organisations like Brooke. And
well, there was a huge. I mean, that's I've never heard anything quite like that before, Noel. But certainly, what we know is people were ostracised from community, so people would have. They'd be taken, and then the child would come back.
In the NHS, they were put in learning disability hospitals when they still existed. It's just that they don't exist anymore.
Sure. Well, and yeah, we've you see a lot of it, don't you, associated with Ireland, and of course same things happen in England, and the rest of the UK too. So we then became one single organisation, I guess, during my time at Brooke.
Yes, there's a really important role for the voluntary and charitable sector for pushing the boundaries of services, and necessarily so.
Yeah,
and being able to advocate for vulnerable people, which is what Brooke was set up to do. It was there to advocate for sexual health needs of a vulnerable cohort of people that otherwise were stigmatized, ostracized, inappropriately institutionalized, imprisoned, etc. And I think those sorts of stories are very important to remember in current debates.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And I mean, Brooke is an amazing organization. Is doing amazing work, some brilliant work with young men, brilliant work with people with learning and physical disabilities, brilliant work with people that are disengaged from other services, and continues to do that sort of work. And I think what's so important in all of this is it just reminds us that none of us can do everything. There are certain things that the NHS can do incredibly well. There are certain things that psychologists can do very well. There's certain things mental health first aiders can do very well. There's certain things that charities and community centres, and somehow we've got to make the best of all of those to really make a difference. And what Brooke and lots of other charities and social enterprises do that is stay very close and are able to work in partnership with communities that have.
That's the value added, isn't it? That, okay, it could be argued that some of the voluntary sector organisations are not as professional, whatever that means. I don't know what that means, but they don't have a nice office, or they're not wearing a nice uniform, or whatever it is, I don't know. But actually are closer to the groups of people that you want them to be closer to, and can represent and advocate, but also get services to people that otherwise wouldn't get services. And that's one of the crucial things, I think, that these organisations can do.
100%. And I think the key bits is interesting. Charity is not amateur. Whether people believe that having a lanyard, having a uniform makes you professional, that's another conversation. But I would just be really clear, charity doesn't mean amateur. It means really skilled at a whole range of things.
Quite frankly, what we were doing in some of these hospital closure programs was trying to get rid of the professionalism, because it was destructive.
Yeah.
It was a way of somebody avoiding actual genuine relationships with people that needed genuine relationships, because you can be very skilled in what you do, but you don't need to be cold and horrible to people and objectify them and turn them into things that you're treating. Do you know what I mean? That's not.
It's interesting, isn't it, about what does professional conjure up in your mind? Because to me, as somebody who's incredibly skilled at building a relationship is equally as professional as somebody who is wearing uniform and working on a ward or wherever they are. They just have different skills. They're not. There isn't a hierarchy.
And I'm one of those people. I tend to generate debate and take sort of extreme positions, as you've already noticed, and you're very skillfully saying somewhere in the middle. That's why you're the CEO and I'm not. All right. So well done, you, Simon. But we used to have a laugh, actually, in some of these programs about, because a directive came down saying you're not allowed to wear the hospital uniforms anymore. You have to wear your ordinary clothes. And I can tell you that caused almost a riot when that happened. But it was always we always had a joke about those people that had the uniform starched into their soul, as if didn't matter what you put them in, you knew they were in uniform because of the way they were. And it was like, they were scary people, didn't want to mess with them at all. But it is, and it's an interesting thing. It's also, for me, it's really important question, like in terms of psychological therapies, for example. How do you form useful, warm human relationships with somebody, which is what we need to do to activate frontal lobe growth, but also maintain a capacity to deliver the evidence-based work that you need to deliver. And there is a negotiation that has to happen, I think, because otherwise I think the quality of the work drops off. Either way, if you go too far into pally or too far into cold and distance, there's somewhere in between, I think, that we're always trying to struggle to find.
Which is the same as real life, isn't it? That relationships are we're all trying to find that perfect boundaried middle ground in which we can hold our own, we can help people grow, we can develop with space for both of you if you're in a relationship. So 100, I 100% agree with that sort of bit. But we know that people heal and grow and develop in and through boundaried relationships.
I would say only really through relationship, because it's our social nature that is where we are safest, and where we are safe is where we are healthy, is my experience tells me that. And that in many ways with my patients, I'm trying to get them to safe places because they're in very unsafe places. Yeah. That, I think, links to an earlier point you made about if and you didn't say it in this way, but it's sort of like this, that if one person or group are excluded and are attacked, then we all are. It makes us all unsafe. And if we manage, and actually what you said is more accurately like this, is what you said. If we can make the marginalized and the vulnerable feel included and safe, that has benefits for the whole of society, not just that group. And it's like getting people to understand that if we create safety rather than scapegoats, it makes all of us safer.
Yeah. Well, and we can, amplify others. We can support others. We can, that sense of, I just find it really bizarre, that sense that you don't shine when other people shine. It's like if you're managing people, you help them be their best, because that's your job. Your job isn't to make you feel great. Don't pull up the ladder after you. I grew up in a very, very loving and just but very working class environment. If you were to take social mobility, there it's almost a perfect case study. It would be unthinkable to now say, oh, let's close down the university options, let's close down the grant options, let's let's just do it. It's like, no, this is our job is to keep on fertilizing the ground for others and being the greenhouse.
So you were in Brook. I imagine there was a bit of resistance to the changes that you brought in, but you've managed them successfully because of that whole conversation about we don't want to be too professional when we're close to people, but all of that stuff is negotiable and navigated, and certainly sort of in terms of developing systems that allow more effective interface between statutory and non-statutory sector services. I mean, I think that's always an ideal dream, really, to try and improve that. I think that, because I've been in both sectors. I've been in all sectors, to be honest. And I enjoy that, and I enjoy particularly, and I still now work with the statutory sector, even though I'm in the private sector. Again, people can be very simplistic about this stuff, but this partnership stuff that happens is golden. When it happens well, it's absolutely golden, because people are bringing a sort of rich, diverse experience and set of skills and set of views to the table, which increase capacity hugely, is my experience.
Absolutely, and when we were going through the merging process, couldn't remember what the word merging was then. When we were going through the merging process, people were saying, well, what if we're wrong? And I was like, we will only know if things go wrong. We will never be able to prove that if we were not merged, that they would have gone right. The next lot of people will have to do with this, what they see right and true. And you see that brilliant work is going on. But it is we're always context dependent on this, but it was definitely the right thing at that moment in time, and I'd like to think provided a foundation for which things can build and develop even further, be even more brilliant.
And whoever takes it on then can decide it's the right thing or they go in a new direction. Life is never static. I mean, it shouldn't be. I'm just about time. I want to move us on a little bit into so you go from Brook. Did you go straight to first?
I went to the National Union of Students for 3.5 years, and then came to Mental Health First Aid England just over 4 years ago.
All right. So tell me about mental health first aid. Which is probably a correct assumption about most subjects, to be honest.
So Mental Health First Aid England is a social enterprise, and the concept of mental health first aid was developed in Australia about 20 odd years ago, when people, unbelievably, when you think about how much we talk about mental health now, weren't talking about mental health in the same way, weren't thinking about how it applies to the general public. That we often hear about 1 in 4 has a mental illness over a lifetime, 1 in 6 a common mental health issue on a weekly basis or over the course of a week. What we don't say is all of us have a brain. All of us need to learn how to help our brain look after us. And what mental health first aid does is 3 things really. One is helps you to understand a bit about mental health and the brain, and that mental health is a continuum, that mental health is not mental illness, that mental health is something we've all got, which is an asset-based sort of model, and we can be mentally healthy with a diagnosed mental illness, and we can be very unwell without one. It's that sort of continuum, again, like life is not static. About stigma and the impact of stigma, and when I said earlier about bonkers, what we know is, of course, that stigma permeates through our language, it permeates through everything that we do, and that people living with mental illness or with poor mental health can often feel that they don't talk because of that sense of, will I be taken seriously? Will I get the next opportunity? Will people be frightened of me, etc.? Whatever it is, those things exist. Then we do some work around signs and symptoms of poor mental health, how to respond if you see those, and how to have good non-judgmental conversations and signposting to sort of help. So that's the sort of core of mental health first aid. We as an organisation target workplaces strategically, and we work with instructor members who are, we don't employ our instructors, they're self-employed or they work in organisations, all work together and train people in mental health awareness, mental health knowledge and skills, mental health first aid. And the reason that we do workplaces, work designed well, of course, should be good for us.
Yeah.
But all too often, work can create stress and support, and people don't feel supported in the context of the workplace. So trying to create healthier workplaces and ensure that people get the support that they need. And you access people in workplaces. They then take it into their communities and into their families as well.
The sort of curriculum that people can learn, they can apply to become mental health first aiders. It's like
a physical first aider.
Arrange for the Red Cross to come into my workplace and do a first aid course, and then you had CPR and burns and all that.
Yeah.
Similar. That's what you do.
It's exactly right.
CPR, I presume.
Same principle. Yeah.
Right. And so what would somebody learn typically? Is it a day, a week, or
2 days? The equivalent of 2 days.
Okay.
So
then
4 half-day sessions, and then so let's see. It's that bit about understanding about mental health and stigma, understanding signs and symptoms, understanding how to respond in particular situations, and then understanding how to have those conversations. And
so let's do the idea of, you can have mental health and mental illness. I know what you mean, but why don't we say a bit more about that? So mental health then is what? How would you describe it?
Well, we all have, so if I said physical health, you wouldn't imagine all sorts of illnesses.
That's
when
right.
we say mental health, people assume mental illness a lot of the time. That's probably the easiest way.
It's my profession's fault, I'm afraid. I'll put my hand up to that. I'm going to take responsibility for that.
Well, all of us, it's about what we've learned, isn't it? And you can have all of the blame individually if you want, but it is there, and I think but we all have mental health, like we want to be healthy, which is our exercise, our diet, and nutrition, but we think our brain is separate from that. So Ruby Wax describes our body and mind as a onesie, and that's the really important bit of this. That our brain needs water, our brain needs sleep, our brain needs rest, our brain needs movement, our brain needs good nutrition in the same way that our body does. And that's a key bit about and even if you have, so of course some people will need medication, maybe for a lifetime, maybe for a period of time, because of mental illness, but everybody can benefit from those things which are your good sleep hygiene, good food, all of that sort of thing. So mental health is about being an asset.
Health and well-being in a broader sense, and not saying that you're either ill or well, but you could be literally both at the same time. In the same way that, I might have an injury, but generally be quite healthy.
Well, we can have a long-term physical illness, and it can impact on our well-being, or not. So it's the same sort of thing. So people live with anxiety and are well. So it's not as clear cut as you're unwell or you're well. It's that we move along that continuum, and that may be because of circumstances. It may just be, and we don't. I think sometimes we try to overthink this, and it's not about. I think the really important bit is we've got to get more sophisticated, haven't we? That if you ask a child, what this is, they'll say their arm, and as they get older, we'll learn that there's the elbow, there's the hand, there's the fingers, there's the shoulder, the bicep, tricep, etc. We're probably at the stage as a society where, when we talk about mental health is the equivalent of saying it's the arm. It covers everything. When actually, there's our happiness and our emotions and our sadness. Then there's, might be your common mental health conditions, and then severe enduring mental illnesses. And we're still fairly new in the conversation.
Yeah, the way I view it, because my background is working sort of initially in inpatient ward settings, heavy-ended stuff, and acute wards, people coming in needing stabilization from acute psychosis, etc. That very serious, dangerous illnesses that people. But health and well-being never came into the conversation on those wards.
Yeah. And
they still don't. I mean, it is, but health and well-being surely has to be the core of whatever we do. So these days, the way I view it is this, that even with an active mental illness, you still need a health and well-being regime.
Yeah.
And that improves your general sense of well-being and your general capacity to function.
Yeah.
Rather than very sort of narrow focused treatments, which you need as well. So you need the medication or you need the psychological therapies or whatever. But actually, it's that broader health and well-being, which includes social cohesion, social connections. Like you say, and I think a lot of people forget this, that we are physiological, psychological organisms. They're not divorced from each other. They're exactly the same thing. Your thoughts and feelings are physical. They're biochemical reactions.
Yeah.
They're not sort of outside of your body. They're inside your body. They happen. And we need to nurture that.
Yeah. And I think, what I've learned, so I arrived obviously at MHFA England without any, what I'd learned by the time I arrived at MHFA England is that our relationships, our choices, whether we use volatile substances, whether the way that we engage with school, whatever it is all related to emotional health and well-being and mental health, whatever language you want to use. But when I've learned from MHFA England my brain has always actually given me signals about what I'm feeling, thinking, when I need help. I've just not noticed them. So what I learned is, how do I tune into that? And I'm very lucky in that I can, if I start to feel overwhelmed, I know what I need to do in order to do that. If I start to feel anxious, it's probably more about physical things that have happened than things. So I haven't slept enough, I might have drunk too much alcohol, I'm knackered myself out from burning the candle at both ends and not getting decent sleep. My mum's answer to everything was sleep. And I think what I'm learning as girls is that probably she might have been right, even though it's really irritating.
The answer, I think sleep and water are the answer to most things.
Yeah.
When it comes
but it's, I think, water, sleep, and something to eat, is always the thing. But I think the key bit in all of this is for us to tune in and to understand enough about the brain and the neuropsychology behind things in order to make decisions and choices which will help us. Turning our phones off. If we're working at home, I will always put my computer away at the end of the day, so it's not the last thing I see before I go to bed, so that it doesn't automatically connect me to the thing which I'm worried about from today, or the thing I might be worried about tomorrow, or even not worried, just takes you into a brain to a workspace when you might have been relaxing, etc. So there is, what I would hope is that over the next 5, 10, 20, probably even 30 years, I'll probably be smoking a pipe somewhere, by the time we even get to the start line on some of this, is that we all understand enough to take actions which mean that we give our brain the best chance it can to look after us, and when we are not well, that we get the support and help we need, whatever that is, whether it's medication, whether it's other forms of treatment, etc.
And also, I mean, I have to say, throughout this sort of my clinical life, there's a lot of people who've come in for treatment who actually could have avoided needing treatment if they got some basic things right in what the choices that they were making. So I'm totally with you. I'm not blaming people for getting ill. You get ill, you get ill, you need help, that's it. That's the way it is. But there's certainly from my own experience of being ill and well, because I've had long periods of depression and anxiety myself, and I've made conscious choices to change the way I do my life. And mostly I'm free of that stuff. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen to me again. I know I'm a high risk of relapse, whatever. It's fine. That's all built into my programming. But certainly I prefer making healthier choices because often it involves doing much more interesting, fun things anyway. To be honest, it's
and I think the key bit for us, if you think about this from an equalities and social justice sort of perspective, is choices are great when we know we've got them and have got the capability and capacity to have them, whether that's the economic freedom, whether that's the understanding, whether it's the access or whatever it is. So our job in all this feels to me is that how do we ensure that everybody has the choices and feels like they have the choices and is able to access support and help as and when they need it as well.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff. I'm just aware of time because I do want to talk about a couple of other charities and organisations that you're involved with. I told you in our phone conversation, it's going to be one of those ones where we run through a million issues that each one of them needs an hour, if not more, to chat about. But I knew this was going to happen. It's fine. It just means I have to bring you back and drill down more into sort of some of the sort of subjects that you come up. But we'll have to leave it there because I think there's a huge amount around, so the Heads Together campaigns around mental fitness, for example, which I think are really exciting ideas.
Yeah.
So try and look at that metaphor of, in the same way they used to talk about physical health and use those types of metaphors to think about preventative work and making yourself more resilient and working out your mental health, and in the same way that you might work out your body and stuff like that. I mean, I think there's some really interesting, exciting stuff that they're doing, but we don't have time. It's where can people get hold of your website and book your courses? James will put the sort of link out and all of that stuff.
MHFAengland.org. So when you're getting those letters in the right way, mental health first aid. So not MFHA, it's MHFA. I shouldn't have said the wrong way around today. MHFAengland.org.
James will find the correct one, don't you worry. Before we finish, just let's touch briefly upon a couple of other issues that you've been involved with, which is suicide and bereavement in general, right?
Yeah.
Just tell me a little bit about that. And just for people who are listening, again, triggering subjects, all of these have maybe been triggering subjects, but if it's close to heart, there are organisations that help. The Samaritans are fantastic. James will put that out. There's other organisations that will signpost you and make sure go out. And Simon may think of some and let you know. But Samaritans is a good place to start if you're feeling isolated and suicidal. I can't tell you how fantastic that organisation is to give a call to. All right.
And I chair the Support After Suicide Partnership, which is based at the Samaritans. And so if people do want information, the Support After Suicide website is a good place to go as well. So I chair that is a partnership which is about trying to support local delivery of services around providing that specialist help and support people might need if they've experienced bereavement by suicide. Really, really important work. So obviously, bereavement and grief associated with bereavement, all sorts of different pathways through that. But those can, of course, be specific. If people have been bereaved by suicide because of everything associated with that.
We had some for our suicide support on, and so if people want to check that in the YouTube listings, you'll find sort of a really interesting discussion about some of the challenges that happen, right down to how services respond or don't respond to you because somebody's taken their own life, and how the police get involved and things like this. And it's quite a challenge, and there is a need for coordination, Simon, I think, to change.
Well, and each local area, there are of support services. There's funding from the NHS, which is rolling out. So the last wave is rolling out this year, but not every area has them at the moment, but they will shortly. And then I also chair the Dying Matters campaign, which is based at Hospice UK. And Dying Matters, again, you can put it in, and Dying Matters campaign. It's really about trying to change the culture. It's a culture change campaign, which is about helping people to have conversations which people don't necessarily want to have or think about having, because none of us know when we're going to die. My brother died at 45. Well, by the time he died, it was expected, but in the 10 days previous to that, wasn't expected, and we hadn't had any of those conversations. And then when my mum was dying, we had a period where we knew and able to have those conversations, and so there's something, and that was really what drove me to want to get involved with Dying Matters campaign. Was the conversations don't necessarily get easier, but having the conversations becomes easier because they become really important. And there's so much about living well and dying well. Obviously, the death bit is rarely a good moment, but everything in the lead up to and afterwards can be, and very much based on how we respond, how we talk about these things. And of course, lots of people don't want to talk about death and dying and bereavement, and Dying Matters campaign is really about trying to change that.
Yeah, and it's also, I think, given what we've just been through over the last few years, really, really important. And people have had some very traumatic deaths over the last few years, and still going through them. And you've alluded to it a little bit with the cost of living crisis. The excess deaths have gone up by 500,000 at the moment, and so it's really, really crucial that we are open about these conversations. I can't stress enough to people that it is not a conversation to shy away from.
No, absolutely. And with the UK, there was a UK Commission on Bereavement, which was just published before Christmas, which has a report about the things which people need to do, and they will feed into the COVID inquiry, which looks at the deaths and what happened. Lots of people obviously died. More people died at home during that period, and what can we learn? Because the thing about this is, of course, it is also a time for us to recognise that maybe this is the time for change. That there are moments and times, and if at the end of this shared experience, the only good thing, or one of the good things that comes out is a greater understanding of the importance of talking about death, then we have to take some of those positives where we can.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's and I say this always in these conversations. In anthropological terms, the beginning of human culture is always measured by grave sites, with the emergence of grave sites and mourning rituals. And so it's the most fundamental bit of expression of our collective social human nature, is that we feel loss when somebody we love goes. Yeah. That's across all cultures, across all time. It's the beginning of human culture. Yeah. And it's such a fundamental human experience that we have civilized ourselves to the point where we don't talk about it is odd in the extreme, and we really need to get back to those conversations. I blame the Victorians for that one personally.
Well, we had mum's funerals during lockdown, and it was just awful leaving the crematorium and not having anybody to. Part of that ritual is about telling the stories and learning and understanding and hearing and being able to laugh and heal. And it was just bizarre. So that ritual is a really, really important part of it.
We cremated my dad a few months ago. Now, I'm not close to my dad. I wasn't close to him. But being part of that whole ritual and delivering a service in the crematorium in the church that other people could respond to and be part of, and they could express their connection to him, was fundamentally important, and I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Yeah. Even though personally I didn't feel very close to him at all for a whole variety of reasons. So but nevertheless, that whole bereavement mourning thing was really important. I can't imagine how horrific that was, to be honest. I mean, I knew it was happening at the time. I'd never met anybody personally who'd had to bury somebody during COVID. It sort of must have been dreadful.
I mean. Yeah, was pretty grim. have to say. But you know, we made up for it. We had a celebration after, and you do all the things, don't you? I guess the learning and the joy from it is that just because it doesn't happen at the sequence and the time that you expect, it doesn't mean it can't happen. We can always go and correct and change and do. It's never too early or too late to do that. So it was bloody awful. Actually, it was 2 years ago this week. It was, but we made up for it in terms of.
Well, I'm sorry you went through that. A lot of people have.
Yeah.
Again, thank you for sharing so honestly and opening up the conversation. And really, I think that's the point. It doesn't take away the pain, but it stops you feeling isolated, alone, and cut off. And so I can tell you clinically reduces your risk of suicidal despair. That's, for nothing else, is a really good idea. Don't go into the depression. You're not alone. I think that's one of the really challenging things about loss, is that it can almost feel like you're cut off, but you're not. It's the most common human experience there is.
Yeah.
When you start opening your mouth, people start sharing their experiences of loss as well. And you're pulled back into the human family again.
Yeah. We actually, so Julie Bentley, who's the chief executive of the Samaritans, and I did a book of curated a book of short of stories of people who'd experienced the death of a sibling because of that reason, that everybody that we spoke to that had experienced the death of a sibling had found it an isolating experience, because there's very little talked about, or people would worry about your parents or about their children, but you as a sibling would often feel done. So experienced the loss of a sibling as an adult. It's called Sisters and Brothers, if anybody wants it. James, if you can put out Sisters and Brothers stories about the death of a sibling. It's on Amazon, and the money goes to Cruise Bereavement Care.
Another fantastic charity. You've worked with all the best charities,
Yeah, worked in some brilliant ones. Really your work history is a fantastic, interesting history through some of the sort of really interesting work that's been happening in the UK. So, been very lucky. Lucky.
I'm sure they're very lucky to have you as well. We are out of time. There's a lot of subjects that have come up, and I hope to bring you back on and we can look in depth at some of the subjects and begin to pull them apart, maybe even bring in partners who can share their experiences, particularly around the suicide, loss, death.
Yeah,
I think we need to generate more conversations around that. I'm also thinking there's a charity I'm on the board of called Drug Fam, which deals with death by suicide and drug overdose, and also another area that's highly stigmatized and sort of in the responses. So it may be an interesting conversation to have, bring them on as well. And
I'd love to. I mean, stigma doesn't help anyone. Silence doesn't help anyone. Secrets don't help anyone.
I've never come across them helping anybody ever in 26 years of clinical practice. So I can sort of fairly much say hand on heart, it's a bad idea to do those things. All right, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, Simon, because we're sort of way over, actually. I'm going to get told off.
You will. It's my fault. I take responsibility. I talk too much.
I'll have everything else. Let's stay there. Bye-bye, folks. I'll see you all next week, and I've got a guest, but guess what? I can't remember who it is, but there you go. My pterodactyl brain is failing me yet again. But we do have a guest next week, and I will see you all next week. Thanks to James for being a great techie again. And thanks to you to Simon. Stay there. I'll say goodbye to everybody, and I'll see you all next week.
Thanks for having me.